You're listening to Three Makes Baby, a podcast about fertility, family, and genetics. I'm Jana Repnow, a fertility counselor and author of Three Makes Baby. Welcome to the show. I'd love to hear more about what that you'd like to share and your experiences in the fertility world.
Yeah, sure. Basically, I was kind of a young traveling nurse in my 20s and just kind of had a heyday traveling all over the country and all over the world, and figured, I'd meet somebody when it was a good time, and I had until at least 35 to think about kids. That's kind of what the going thought was back then.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of was having fun, didn't really think about much. And I did meet somebody wonderful when I was around 30. And, we took the time to get to know each other and finally started trying to have kiddos at around age 34, and just started running into roadblocks, miscarriage, and just not getting pregnant. So we went to my regular OB, and they did the test, that AMH level that kind of, they say it's like an egg timer test, but it kind of indicates ovarian reserve, and it was already non-detectable at 35.
Okay. Wow.
So I knew at that point it was going to be quite a journey for me, and that's kind of where it started for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then you knew at that point you were going to need to use a donor.
Well, I'm fairly tenacious and hard-headed, so I knew that there were 1% that was able to get pregnant. So we went ahead and went to the reproductive endocrinologist at a fertility clinic, and she told us right then, it's not likely that you're going to get conceive with your own eggs. You're more than likely going to have to use donor eggs, but you can try. So that's kind of what we went on, is just starting off with me, and kind of focusing on that. And we did try some pretty hefty rounds of stimulation. I was making like one follicle, even with thousands of dollars of stimulation medication.
Wow.
So
yeah,
that was shocking.
oh gosh, I know, I can't imagine. And so it's so, there's so many different stories out there, and it's fascinating to hear everyone's stories. What's really interesting about you is your personal story led you in a direction to produce something, right? I feel like we're hiding it, and it's kind of we're about to do the reveal of who you are.
Oh, who I am? First and foremost, I'm a nurse. But yeah, this path led me like so many ways I didn't even think I'd go. Obviously, to being a mom of kiddos that were born to me through embryo adoption.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's made me become an author of a book that I created for my son. Yeah, it's called "You Were Made for Me."
Yeah.
And I wrote it for him because as I was going through this option that I finally ended up at after, a lot of other things in between, I just was like, how on earth am I going to, explain this to them? And I started looking for all kinds of books, and, there's some stuff out there, but there's just not a lot of quality books for kids that kind of touch on this topic. And if they do, they're just so specific, because there's such a variety of what could have happened to get your family. So
true. Yeah. And you know what? I wanted people to know who you were. But then just before we went much further, because I think that a lot of people are aware of your book and have your book. I've heard from my followers. And so I wanted to hear, the story behind it, and also talk to you about the book itself and the language that you use and why that's important with children. I do want to back up and ask you what led you to decide embryo adoption over egg donation.
Right. So the egg donation thing just did not work for us. We tried 2 egg donor cycles. We opted, it was really interesting, when we first got introduced to the fact of doing an egg donation cycle. our clinic had said, hey, there's another couple that would like to maybe do like a split cycle with you. That means, you kind of split the cost and you split whatever eggs are produced. And at that point, we were just considering it for the first time. So we kind of opted out thinking that, we may need as many as are able to get. So let's do our own cycle first. So we did that first cycle and we got an awesome response from the donor. We got 26 eggs that they were able to retrieve, which was so exciting. I mean, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, like it's totally going to happen. And then the next day I was driving to work and the embryologist called me with the results of the first day fertilization rate. And it was 0. She literally said not a single of these 26 eggs fertilized using the ICSI, where they inject the sperm into the egg.
Mm-hmm.
And I speak about it a lot to people that ask, and want to know my story and are kind of looking for some insight into the process. But that was probably the defining moment for me, that really it changed a lot of what I was in my heart willing to accept and what I could accept as far as conception, because that was such a traumatizing moment for me, such a shock, that it was just kind of an unbelievable letdown. I just was
Yeah.
sitting in my car, and after I got off the phone with the embryologist, I had such a visceral reaction. All I could do was just literally scream and bang my hands on the steering wheel of my car and shake my
Yeah.
head, because
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe it. I figured, for sure we can try all this stuff and it'll work.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so embryo adoption, we did another cycle, and that didn't work as well. And we did another egg donation cycle. We did a split cycle at that time, and our eggs did not fertilize again with my husband's sperm, but the other couple's allotment of eggs did fertilize. So at that point, we just figured we were dealing with a me factor and a him factor. And so we were kind of just both out of the equation at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
we just, our doctor said, there's a couple that wants to donate their embryos. And would you be interested in that? And this was just a month after the last failed cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And I was already at a place where it really didn't necessarily, it wasn't as, I don't know how to say it, because it's such a process. I can't just tell people that I got to a place of acceptance right away. I had to go through the journey, and I had to feel the disappointments and the sadness and the heartache and all of those things in order for my heart to be at a place where I was just like, yeah, I'm totally happy and accepting to use donor embryos that a family is willing to donate, to give them a chance at life.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Did you have someone guiding you through that and counseling you to help you?
I didn't, and that's a lot of the reason, especially that I'm excited to talk, on your podcast. I know there's a lot of changes going on, even in the last year or two, in regards to donor conception.
Mm-hmm.
And me creating this book, this children's book, it got me really interacting with the community, the trying to conceive community, and the community of donor conceived,
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted to know how people felt about it. I wanted to express that in my book. I wanted to help parents find a connection that they just weren't sure they were going to have. And so I started learning a lot more about changes that are happening with, donor conception and
Mm-hmm.
educating parents, and I'm very excited about it. Uh, and so that's part of what I wish had happened for me. Not because I would
Mm-hmm.
change anything. I mean, I wouldn't change how I got to my children at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that back then there was not a lot of counseling. It was really just a genetic counseling session that talked about diseases or reports from the family, things that we might look out for. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
and that it was an anonymous donation. The family that was donating didn't want to destroy these embryos, but they also didn't necessarily want to have any more connection with them. And so we accepted that, and
Mm.
part of me, thinking back, I was so just traumatized by all of the things that we had gone through. And um, it kind of seemed like a very safe option for me, to be
Mhm.
honest.
Mhm. Sure.
I thought, oh, okay, this will be safe emotionally for me.
So tell me when you first, well, first of all, tell me how old your child is now, so we kind of can know a time frame.
Yeah. So I have a 4-year-old,
Okay.
and then I have a 15-month-old girl now,
Okay.
and they're both biological siblings.
So they're biological siblings. And so you were going through this about 4 or 5 years ago, and still at that time really wasn't getting or didn't get the counseling that you really would have benefited from, it sounds like.
I think so. I mean, I think for sure now that I've kind of gotten into the world of donor conception, my book, and just talking to people, um, and knowing how emotionally and mentally healthy it is, for sure now that I've kind of gotten into the world of um, I wish I could go back and have had a little bit more knowledge about that option, presently healthy it is for I wish I could go back, and it would have been how, it would have, but it would have been nice if that was, or had that discussion, or had some different, presented to me. Not that I would have, but it would have been nice.
Yeah. Well, and the reason I say that is because I was thinking it was longer. And, I've been doing this for 10 years, and it is difficult to convince doctors that just to have their patients go through sort of a standard counseling. It's not because anything's wrong with them. It's not because, you know, they are struggling in a way that would interfere with their procedure at all. It's just that it's like a benefit. It's so helpful. So many women and men are struggling emotionally and just socially. So having that as a resource is important. I want to ask you about your book because I'm looking at the cover of it right now, and I just love the little guy that you have depicted that's sitting on top of a pile, and he's sitting on, it looks like a cute little cartoony pile of jigsaw puzzle pieces and DNA. Can you tell me a little bit more about that illustration?
Yeah, so every single one of those illustrations that's in that book, I actually drew, but I had somebody that knows how to
Wow.
be professional reenact them on a digital.
Mhm.
So the stick figure drawings are quite funny, but it was able to get my point across. So yeah, the character on the front, of course, is my son, and I just was trying to present the feeling that I had that he was made for me. And it's kind of a play on words because obviously he was, initially made for another couple. But in my mind, how the universe works and how this whole fertility thing works, I just truly believe that as you kind of go through your journey, no matter what that path to parenthood is, you are going to end up with the child that was made for you,
Mhm.
and so
Yeah.
puzzle pieces were just a good way. When I thought in my mind, well, how am I going to explain this to him? You need a lot of different pieces to make up a baby. And so the puzzle analogy came to me. And then obviously, the DNA part of it can't be ignored. It's an extremely powerful part that
Absolutely.
I don't ever want to take away from their story. So I
Yeah.
wanted it to be in their story so we could talk about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you use puzzle pieces than the way you described it on your end. On the for adopted and donor conceived individuals, they talk about puzzle pieces in a sense of puzzle pieces that might be missing from their just information about their identity. So that's why when I saw that I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, it comes from both sides, both the puzzle pieces that put together to make him who he is, and then also just wanting that information, or some kids wanting those different pieces of the puzzle just to understand themselves better. Do you have contact at all right now with your donor parents, or no?
Me, no, I don't. And probably over this last year, as it's been in my mind more and more, as I'm thinking more and more of my children and less of myself, um, I I like want that option for them. Whereas before it seemed safe and it just wasn't going to be, it was going to be, like they could probably find them through 23andMe, but it wasn't like something that was part of my everyday life, right? Initially, I think that's a fear, is like, how am I going to share my child? How's that going to
Hmm.
feel?
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, but now, like kind of being on the other side of it, I see it as like extremely valuable. And so I don't have, the capability, but I have reached out to my fertility clinic, and asked them, to recheck on things like, would there be an option that you could, go back retroactively and just touch base with some of these, families that have donated and say, there's new information that it really is helping these children to be able to reach out in some way. And would you consider, I even said something as easy as, would you consider a letter right now, as to just why you donate it, what you're like,
Mhm.
and then if you don't feel comfortable, sharing it now, have it available at the clinic to be released when the child is, of a certain age that you determine, maybe adolescence or,
Mhm.
whatever the parties are comfortable with. So I know that we're dealing with anonymity is promised back when it was promisable. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so, but I did ask them, if that was possible. And, I am proud of the clinic that I came from, in that they are actually, changing their program, their donation program,
Oh, wow.
to incorporate a lot more of what's going on.
Okay, good.
And actually, it's strange. It's a funny coincidence. There's a group called, Empower Donation,
Mhm.
that's just getting started. That's going to start, doing exactly what we're talking about, helping to educate clinics on all of these options, so that like all the donor conceived, parties, or all the people that are part of third party conception, can have all of these tools. So I'm really excited for them to get started. But
Who is that group run by?
well, so it's called Empower Donation, and, um, there's 3 women on it, and one of them was, in the that documentary, One More Shot, um, and then the person that ended up being an interesting link for me was, Gina Davis is her name. She's a genetic counselor, and she was actually my genetic counselor when I was going through the donor egg cycles and the embryo donor.
Mhm.
So it's just a really weird connection that ended up happening. And then there's another woman as well, and so they're starting this, nonprofit organization. They are, making changes based on this group, and some of their recommendations.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's really exciting. It doesn't necessarily address me right now, because I think I kind of got caught in that in between,
Mm.
um, thing.
Mm.
But I have hopes that possibly it can expand to kind of retroactive donations as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that's great to have an organized effort, because right now it's individuals trying, like me, trying to go out for the past 10 years and make a difference and knock on doctors' doors and not really getting very far, to be honest. I mean, I've brought lunches and all kinds of things, and it is hard to change, but it is something that we'll keep working on. And that's change is on the horizon. It's here, and I've seen a certain like amount of change in the past even 2 years and year that's been pretty encouraging. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad to hear that. And that's when I had, learned about you, obviously getting online a little bit more and looking into books and hearing what people are saying. I was real excited to, see what you were doing, and excited
Mm.
that somebody is doing it, in such an area, such a consolidated area where people are trying to conceive, trying to make choices. You're
Yeah.
also dealing with the donor conceived side, so that's super important to me as a parent.
Yeah, it's important that we have transparency in the field, and we really don't right now. And so, my push is to encourage more transparency. And I'll be having guests on the podcast this in season 2 that will be speaking to some of the things that are happening. Keep continuing to speak to some of the things that are happening that that could change for the better. And yeah, so I think that's what it's all about, is positive change and going about it in a way that is keeping in mind what's best for the kids. so that they can have a better experience with this, and lifting the secrecy and the shame. And that's what it's all about. So yeah, it's always great to connect with other people that are on that page too, because there are a lot of people still out there that are not able and willing to talk about donor conception, and they have used a donor and they are still keeping it secret. So it's
Yeah,
still the
and
majority.
yeah, and I'll be honest, I with the book, I've gotten to connect with obviously so many people that are either going through it or have a donor conceived child that haven't told. And really, I chat with them, and I they're trying to, everybody's trying to look for something to relate to, right? Because we're all kind
Yeah.
of in uncharted territory together, especially the ones with younger ones. New era where transparency is more of a push. And but just because it's a push and we know we should do it doesn't mean we know how or how we're going to feel about it. So when I talk to some of these, usually moms, but sometimes dads, about how I feel about it, I kind of think about it like, um, I don't necessarily, because their number one question is, am I going to love this child like I would if it was my biological child? They want to kind of know how I feel. And I tell them, there's so many different types of love, right? I mean,
Hmm.
there's not just one type of love, and it doesn't mean that it's less love. It just means it's different based on relationships. So, while I can't promise them that it's not going to be, hard or without sacrifice, and I can't promise that, their child's not going to want to know about their donors, um, I can assure them that, my children, I love them like so much, and I can't imagine that I would love a genetic child more.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel, but
Yeah.
I'm 4 years in now, and
Yeah.
so
You've got a lot of
uh, you know,
attachment. Yeah. And I tell people love is too complex to compare, to reduce it to a comparison. And just what you said, there are so many different types and different ways that we love each other that it's too complex to compare them. And I say, don't look at love in terms of basically of equality. So we just can't apply that. It's just the uniqueness. We look at love in terms of its uniqueness.
and I mean that's what became interesting about my book, is that what I was hearing from people, and it was like my favorite thing to get people's reviews that would send me either just personal emails or reviews, and they would say, like one of my favorite one was that, she said that they were considering embryo adoption, but that her husband, was nervous and wasn't really on board, and that they ordered my book and read it, and that, that it just created this emotional response in them,
Hmm.
and made, brought them to tears, which then of course brings me to tears anytime somebody says that,
Yeah.
because
Oh, yeah.
it's the same for me. And so what my book tries to do, and what I did for my own children before I even thought anybody else would want to read this book, was to kind of just in a very like lyrical way, because I love reading like, rhyming books to my young children, but just it creates a connection. So for this couple, they hadn't even had a child yet. They were just considering it, but it gave them kind of an emotional peek into the possibility of a real connection that they just weren't sure was going to happen, with a
Mhm.
donor conceived child.
Yeah, that
And
makes
so I think
sense. Mm.
overall, what I found, yeah, with people that are, considering it and reading this book, or just have a newborn or have a young child, it really does pull some kind of an emotional connection out of them when they read these words,
Mhm.
and say
Speaks to
them,
their heart.
rep-
Yeah.
you know, yeah,
Mhm.
in repetition to their child. It's like practicing this connection that they know they have, but that they want their child to feel as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it makes sense. Now, on the flip side, I can't let you go without asking this question because I am tuned into the donor conceived adult perspective and, do interact with quite a few donor conceived adults and help them. They come to me if they want to find their donor and as adults and things like that. So there is a contingent that might misinterpret your title of your book, "You Were Made for Me," in as that disregarding their feelings about who they are, about their connection to the the genetic parents. So how help to clarify that, if you could, for those that maybe are looking at that and saying, oh gosh, that seems like maybe a more parent focused, way to phrase it. But although, I want you
Sure.
to know I get it, because I understand and feel that way about my daughter. We adopted from China, and they call it the red thread attached string theory, where you're connected by this invisible red thread. So it's sort of more of a spiritual connection. But for those, could you explain your perspective on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And I totally get that. And of course, this is all like in hindsight, right? Because I created this for my child, just my child, based on, how I was feeling about them in an era where anonymity, was still kind of it was still like, "Oh, okay, this is an anonymous donation." So, I kind of create it based on just my feelings for them and my feelings of wanting to always let them know how they came to be. And so the play on words with "you were made for me." Now, of course, yeah, when I think about it, like for donor conceived people, because I definitely have chatted with them, and I do know, some of the feelings that they have, which are totally valid. I can see how it could be like, oh, wow, I was made for you. Like, I don't, no, I was made for this other couple, and why are you disregarding that? And
Yeah.
so, this is a children's book, so obviously it starts young. Uh, all I would say, about that is that, this book in the beginning is just a building block for parents to begin just attempting to try to sprinkle this topic into their young child.
Yeah.
And as their child's mind grows and they're able to grasp different concepts, they'll at least
Hmm.
have the building blocks to discuss it and then
Hmm.
start talking about that they have surrounding that. And for my own children, it is the utmost importance that they have whatever emotional um, feelings that they have. I'm going to be there, and we're going to go through it. And I don't have a fear that I'm going to be any less of their mother, because we're going to have just irreplaceable time together. Um, I want them to feel complete, whatever way that's going to be.
Hmm.
And so I can see that with some donor conceived individuals, that might be a little off putting, but it never was meant to be at all. And
It wasn't
when
meant
I
to be that
speak
way.
with
Hmm.
no, yeah, and when I speak with donor conceived individuals, I've had some real good conversations with them. I mean, I their voice is so important to me, no matter what it is, because like they're like the voice of my children, or they're
Yeah.
my possible, the children's possible voice. So I want to hear them. I want to hear what's making them, feel different ways, and I want to use that to help my own children.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Great. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that perspective. I think that helps, and it helps educate other young parents and parents that are, or couples that are planning for donor conception, to understand the perspective of their child before they go into it, to try to understand that perspective. And that's just what's been missing uh, in donor conception since its inception, really is focusing on the child. And we can do both. We can focus on the parent and the child. That's what my book attempts to do. And it also does
yes.
give you scripts and for how to continue talking to your children in preschool, middle childhood, and adolescence, and how to continue after they read your book, and they have the building blocks. They continue to learn how to engage and talk with their kids as their brain develops. So that is great. I love they go great
Exactly.
together. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, they do. And there's some really good authors coming out that with some stuff that's just it's just growing. You can tell
Hmm.
the the libraries that you can have now of donor conceived books is so much better and better quality. And so I just applaud these other authors that are doing this, because it's kind of cool, because we're just moms that we're doing it for our kids, but there's a need for it. And so it's really cool that we're able to kind of get out there and together address this need, right? Because
Hmm.
nobody needs one book. Come on, we don't have one book. I have like 10,000 books in my in my
Oh
kids'
yeah.
room right now. I mean,
Absolutely.
you have to have different ways to talk about it, because kids like to, they hear different things, and it resonates in different ways. So I truly appreciate the other authors that are making some great waves in this area.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Sheri. It was really great chatting with you about this.
Oh, yeah. Well, I really appreciate what you're doing, Jana. And I've read your book and I look forward
Well,
to the
thank you.
workbook. I have it ordered, but I haven't gotten it yet. So I look forward to that as well. And thanks for having me on, spreading the word about this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for listening. If you would like to follow for more content, you can go to my Instagram and Facebook account at Jana Repnow LPC, or follow 3 Makes Baby on Instagram. You can get a copy of my book and the companion workbook to 3 Makes Baby on Amazon. If you like this podcast, be sure to like and subscribe. Have a great day.